Hello there. Welcome. Welcome back for another episode of this podcast. Today, I was going to talk to you about blending up your own super soil, and based on my formulations for Steve's Special Blend, which I used to make a long time ago. And, it's based on trying to build up a soil for the months you're intending to have in grow and flower, and hoping that designing it around things that'll break down in that time frame, So obviously your veg blend is going to be a little different than your flowering blend. So you want to stagger your inputs, even if you're putting them in all at once. For example, different grinds of meals release at different times. So if you have 3 different grinds of bone meal, you'll stagger the release of it. You have fine, extra fine, medium. The medium will be the last to release, become bioavailable to the plants. So anyways, I kind of want to give you an idea how it even started with me. I started growing in soil in guerrilla spots, just a plant here and there. And the first year I'd mixed up some compost and like purchased compost, like steer manure or something lame, and potting soil. And then I had some of my mom's CIL rose bloom food for big, beautiful blooms. And I thought, well, let's try some of that for the flowering. And it was kind of slow release pellets. But I found, in that year that was the first year I really harvested nice flowers and was like blown away. But I still noticed them to be a little bit tinny. And the steer manure wasn't well composted because it still smelled, it wasn't finished composting when I bought it. And, it blew me away that when I was smoking some of that herb around somebody who doesn't smoke weed, and they came into the room, I went, that smells like cow shit. And I'm thinking, well, it was grown. So I guess it picks it up. And I thought it may be, first I thought he was just, obviously he didn't like the smell. but anyway, I thought it was just the smell of weed that he didn't like. But I'd gone out and had a shower and then came back to that room later. And I totally smelled it. It totally hit me like he's right. It does smell like cow shit. And then I realized, it's the environment that the plant's grown in will contribute to what it smells and tastes like later. Like it'll have its genetic components, but if you grow it out of raw fish or fish meal, it smells like dead fish in the bud, so that's a whole other story. But somebody, I'm going to share that with you anyway. But a guy, friend of a friend, was coming by my apartment in university, and he had supposedly some nice herb to sell, and he came by. He had a backpack with a few half-pound bags in it, I think. And before he even opened the backpack, he sat down in my living room where I'd already been smoking weed, and he sat down, and I said, "Did you grow that with fish emulsion?" And he just went, "What are you talking? How? What? How?" And I said, "I did it once. I can smell that. I can smell that. I can't stand that smell of weed. Sorry." And he's like, "Nobody's ever said that to me. They all just said, 'Wow, sticky buds,' But he said, 'My brother and I, we grow this outdoors in the holes, dig holes, and we catch suckers, and we just throw the suckers in the holes. And that's a big part of our feed program.'" So it's just laughing. He says, "But you nailed it before I even touched the bags." But it just goes to show you, whatever you're using, discerning palates with noses will pick up on. And then I started to think, that year I started reading like Best of Sensibilia tips and getting more organic grower mindset and thinking I gotta try this and just use if you're not relying on any one fert and you've got a whole bunch of amendments and fertilizers in the mix, then none of them really dominate, and really stick out like a sore thumb like that cow manure, steer manure did the year before. So, even if you've probably seen people who just grow with guano a lot through flower, and it has its own taste too, and of course there's different guanos and different sources. But I thought, my philosophy was let's try and use as many different things that all have their own benefits to the blend, but also that they don't overpower it in a sensory level, So that was kind of the mindset I'd got into with it. By the time I started making commercial version, what I did was I made a dry mix, which was Steve's special blend that came in 3-gallon or 5-gallon pails. And that dry mix had 17 components in it, give or take, because we also did a vegan blend with some substitutions. The original blend had 3 grinds of bone meal plus blood meal and feather meal. And I think that was it for the animal products. But then I had 1 or 2 vegan friends / customers that were like, man, it'd be great if you could make a vegan version of this and just leave out the animal stuff. And I said, well, that's a good idea. And it wasn't so much that it was a vegan thing, which is still beautiful, but it's that for outdoors, bone meal and blood meal attract raccoons, so you get vermin digging in the holes. So I thought the vegan mix will be better for outdoor because they don't want to go dig up your seaweed and alfalfa meal. So off the top of my head, let me see if I can remember all the things that went in it. I'm going to count on my fingers perhaps because I'm pretty sure there was 17 in the original one. Then later I found a few other things I don't mind using as well. And I always vary it depending on location. So if I'm somewhere in a different continent and I don't have access to all the ingredients, I'm not really worried about it. It's just a question of local substitution. So there's local sources of all the minerals and everything. It's, generally speaking, you can find a local substitute. There's always exceptions. Like if somebody's going to go, what about Antarctica? Oh, come on, I don't know. But, if, maybe in Canada, you don't get a lot of excess banana peels, but in Thailand, you could go to the factory where they make banana chips and get truckloads of banana peels. So banana peels are fantastic. Lots of potassium and probably more. but anyways, let me see if I can remember off the top of my head what was in the dry mix. So we had 3 grinds of bone meal. I'll call those 1, 2, 3. The blood meal, feather meal, corn meal. It was corn gluten meal, alfalfa meal, flax meal, langbeinite, rock phosphate, green sand, sunflower seed hullash, and mycorrhizal, the little pouches of mycorrhizal rise. I would get them to mix in at the same time when they add the dry mix to the soil. So in addition to all of that stuff, I used 3 types of guano: Chilean seabird guano, fruit bat guano, and a regular insect bat guano. So it's important to remember when you mix up that dry meal, all the dry meals, and you add them to the wet soil with the compost, you've got to wait at least a week before you plant it. And you could leave it longer and you'll see the mycelium run all over it. But those, if you've got it in containers, like they feel like they're going to spontaneously combust. The soil absolutely takes off when you mix those dry meals into the wet mix. It gets very hot very fast. So don't think about using the soil right away when you mix it up. It's probably got to cool down, like heat up and cool down for 8 days anyway, a week, 8 days. You'll know when, because it'll be hot to the touch until it's ready. Once it's cooled down, it's ready to go. So if you can let it sit, mix it up a month before you need it, even better. There's no worries, but just be sure to realize it's gonna get hot. Anyways, it's what I would do is try and balance it out to look for the finishing blend. So if we say, for example, you want to blend up a 3-month soil run where you're going to have the first half of that, the first month of that, all veg. The next 2 months, the transition into flowering, of course. So you don't want to have too much nitrogen by the end of the first month, but you still definitely need some. But too much nitrogen will inhibit the flowering and or make it leafier. But generally it slows it down entirely. So you can start out with a pretty lush and dark green, but it's got to tone it down a little by flowering time. So to put it into, numbers, what I would be looking for would be a 265 was how I tried to make the blend up. And I would take any of the ingredients and put them, this is the part where it gets a little tricky, but it's not that tricky. But it really does vary on where you are, whether you're talking about application rates per square foot, per cubic meter, per cubic yard. You've got to kind of choose your lane and convert everything to those terms. And so if you're doing it by the cubic meter, then you're saying, okay, if I balance these all in here, I should get about a 265 as it releases. It's not instantly available, but you're going to get more nitrogen at the beginning using compost or castings to get it roaring. I typically would just go for the middle application rate. So if it said put 2 to 4 grams per square meter, I would put 3. I would just go for the middle of the road on each of those components based on X amount of mix. And it was pretty darn good. And when you're mixing it up with potting soil, common ones in BC would be the Pro Mix or Sunshine 4, and they're fairly sandy and nice crumbly soil so that it's doesn't get overly compacted, because when you start adding your compost and castings, it can get a little denser. And typically of that dry mix of the special blend, people would add, let's say, 2 to 4 cups per 5-gallon pot. And depending on if they're growing heavier feeders or not, perhaps. But I've seen other people did some neat stuff, took the special blend, put it in an old coffee maker, and percolated it, and it came out, this fertilizer tea that was brewed out like this. They just made it like a pot of coffee, but it was way too strong and burned the plants. But you can make your own liquid concentrate that's more readily available, of course. So once you've got that liquid, and you could still throw the leftover grounds into the mix, as it were. But if you did need to get an extra jolt of a little flower boost, that's one way to get at it. For medium, I've tried tons of mediums over the years. And, I've had great success using peat moss blends or Coir. I've tried every type of hydroponic or aeroponic versions too. But, most people's potting soil, they're either looking at Coir-based blend or peat moss. They can do a blend of them too. And the Coir, if it's been properly rinsed and buffered, it makes a great medium, has a lot of great characteristics. But, it was fine to use in the tropics for me because they're native and they're easily domestically available. And the thing that it blows me away, because peat moss works really well too, but it seems to be a bit of a shame that they have to dig up the bogs to get it, So I've thought, I'd heard of it, and I've seen like hemp flax had made some medium out of hemp, and I just thought, why not just try filling up some outdoor pots with chopped up plants? So I would do those, and I would run them with the same amount of compost, same amount of special blend, side by side with traditional potting soil for cannabis, and I think it was the Promix mycorrhizae. It was unbelievable. Like, they literally grew the same. Like, you couldn't even tell which pot was which. But the pot that I'd use the cannabis stock on, it was 80% of the volume of that pot was the stalks, and then I'd add compost and a little bit of potting soil and the blend. But the potting soil I would put to fill in the cracks, because the ganja stalks, I won't even say hemp stalks, but the ganja stalks that I chop up to put in were maybe 2 to 4 inches, all different diameters, even the root balls and stuff. And these they're like straws, right? So they all have little air tube in them, and they break down. Now, maybe you wouldn't want to put the uncomposted ones in the pots indoors because you're going to have more potential for mildew in that while they're breaking down. But I really didn't have a problem doing outside, planting in green stalks, like chopping up green stalks and burying them. And man, I would highly recommend it. And I think somebody needs to go to town on getting that out there as a peat moss substitute. It could be anywhere they use peat moss to grow begonias on their balcony, they should be using hemp medium. And obviously, a lot of people would feel better using it composted. I can't blame them, but no joke, even if you just chop up all your green stems and fill a big pot, unless you've got something that's really a problem with mildew, I don't think you're gonna have any problem, because as long as the plants are very healthy and lush, they've done really, really well, and it hasn't been an issue. So, and now they've been in those pots of living soil for maybe 4 years, so they're not, as they would settle out, I would be topping them up more with top dressing, but because the root balls have kind of grown on each other into each other for 4 years, there's not as much room around the top for top dressing anymore. So I think I'm going to have to scrape a layer out of there, because I still like to top dress them with some compost. And I also, really big fan, which I started doing when I had a vineyard. Somebody came around selling Grow Aloe, which was aloe vera in a powder. And they have it like super small so that you can put it in a sprayer and foliar your feed with it, or dissolve it into fertigation systems. So I was given a trial amount for the vineyard, and it worked really good. And I tried some with some herb plants, and they liked it. And I thought it only makes sense, because we had all tried doing clones with some fresh aloe leaves and stuff as experimental times, I'm sure, with lots of us, because it's just such a common thing. But I just started saying, it's great to have aloe around to eat. Grows real easy. So I have tons of it around now. I have so many pots of aloe all over the house and all over the yard in the spring and summer and fall. And I'm able to harvest all these leaves. So I can dig a slot in the soil and just push an aloe leaf in. Or if I'm filling the pots up, I might put 10 big fat aloe leaves in there. And the plants seem to just love it. And even I'll make a tea out of them through the summer, just that I have lots of aloe. So I'll split some open and throw it in the buckets, because I always have the water I'm going to give the plants at least tepid, sitting out for a few days. But I'll throw some aloe in it, or a bunch of mint. I have tons of mint plants, so I'll just like make a little green tea with it and then water that in. And boy, oh boy, they have such a waxy green sheen to the leaves that they look like they're, sprayed with wax. And I tend to not spray anything if I can help it. And most years, absolutely nothing. And the most I would spray, if I ever was spraying, would probably be peroxide, because I really don't have a pest problem around here. But I have had the odd plant where I've seen a little mildew and used a bit of peroxide on it. In the tropics, where there's a more pest pressure, we'd find that garlic chili oil is typically a good, moderate control. But anyways, that's a little of that. So the other thing is, so whichever medium you choose to use, whether you get your hands on some hemp or peat moss or coir mixed with vermiculite and perlite, or just those some people like to grow in. And, the nice thing with coir is that also, besides the coir, you can get cocoa fibers that are the longer fibers, and you can get the chunks, and you can get the chips that are like the chips of the shell. And those are like brown perlite. So I haven't seen them in very many blends, but that's what we used to put in ours, was all three parts of the cocoa, not just the coir. So you can totally make a beautiful blend with any of those things, but you're basically looking at something that holds quite a bit of water, but still has to hold some air. So, like, saturation point of your soil, you should still have, say, 20% air in there. So the air's the macro pores where the water drains out of, and the water's held in the micro pores, which are tight enough that they stay wet, so that's why the soil's soggy, is because of the micropores. But when you find you got the air holding capacity and the water holding capacity of your soil, so they're both valid considerations. Naturally, pH is a consideration. Oh yeah, dolomitic lime, that was another ingredient in the blend I'd forgotten. But Epsom salts. We definitely had Epsom salts in there. And yeah, there's so much you can put in. Things that I found later in life that I've occasionally used would be pozzolan, which is like a bentonite clay, I believe. And it, clay makes a heavier soil, obviously, so it holds water. So some of these things you can think about orchids or bonsai or something. Like with orchids, if you live somewhere humid, you might just grow in wood chips and think the moss is the death moss. But if you live somewhere dry, you can't get away with growing them on wood chips. You're going to have to grow them on moss because it holds enough water for them. So your local environment determines a little bit, optimally how dry you want that soil to be. So if you're somewhere where water conservation is everything, then you might want to run a little stickier soil and have a little bit of that clay in there. There's just, your local variables count. If you're somewhere where shedding water's the important part, then you're not going to want to add any clay. You're going to need lighter, maybe cut it with some sand or something. You need a lighter zone. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts on what you want to do to blend your local soil up into a flowering mix. Well, you can, pre-program that soil if you want a 3-month flowering, let's say 1 month veg, 2 months flowering, or 2 months veg, 3 months flowering. You can customize the soil based on the breakdown rates of each of the components. So you can gauge what you want to get it through. It's putting your signature on it too when you create your own terroir like that. Like you're bringing, like, example, if you had a one design race, where everybody grows out the same clone, and then it's interesting because you can give 20 growers the same clone and get back 20 different but similar buds. Like they're like, okay, it's the same genetic, but the different environments create, different expressions of it. So you'll see quite a bit of variation that way. Now, if everybody grows in the same temperature with the same newts and the same medium, you're not going to see as much variation. But if people start putting their fingerprint on it, mixing up something special, I think it helps you, put your mark on your bud, whether it's your homegrown or commercial. It doesn't matter. Either way, you can kind of get a theme going there that is an identifier. You say, okay, well, this tastes like it came from that farm. Much as, you can taste something from Mexico that tastes totally different than something from Canada. Like, even if they were the same genetics, my goodness, the expressions are so different in those different places, and you could never mistake one from the other. I see the huge difference, too, between Ontario and BC, because I think, well, part of it is if they're outdoor soil, of course, outdoor in the ground, but also is a hard water, soft water factor that seems to, give a signature taste to the flower. So even the indoors. Anyway, it's always interesting to see. And they sell different fertilizer blends for the salt growers that reflect whether they're in a hard water or soft water area. And of course, some people are using their own RO water and everything. That's another thing. If you can build up your living soil and water it from a pond, you've got the best of both worlds, because that pond water brings so much life. Like, I like to use fish nutrients, not dead fish. I want fish, waste is absolutely a benefit into the fields or into your pots, whatever scale you're doing it on. If you can irrigate it from a rich sweetwater pond, you'll bring so much life to the soil. It's really, I don't know the names of all the microorganisms involved. You can go down that rabbit hole as far as you want, but you can see, dramatic difference between stuff getting pond water versus tap water or something. It really is, like a magic tonic for them almost. Anyway, I don't want to drone on too much longer about this. This isn't, a complicated matter. It's just sort of my philosophy on how I like to blend the soil. I guess the last thing I'd leave you with is to squish it. Pick up a handful and squish it. If it clumps together, it's too heavy. Maybe unless you're in the desert or something and you wanted that. But typically what you want is that you can crush up a handful of it, and when you open your hand, it'll still fall apart. You want that much crumble to it. So that's a good rule of thumb, because cannabis doesn't want to be waterlogged. So if you are riding the fine line between water conservation versus being waterlogged, be careful. You could go down to 10% air, but I think 20 is optimum. But as long as you got 10% air, you're still in the green zone, I'd say. But either way, I wish you luck blending it up. I've been using for the last 5 years a compost bin that's strictly household compost. So it's got banana peels and avocados and eggshells and coffee grinds and, all the stuff from the kitchen. And I haven't had to go out and buy any worm castings or compost in several years now because there's enough there that I can top dress all my pots and they're golden, so I haven't had to, repot any of the pots. I mixed them up as I got here and they just get a little top dressing and some tea and the stuff grows out of there just dynamite. So for how far north I am, I don't worry about that. It's not going to be the totally perfect flower as long as it's great genetics and nearly there, great for hash. So I stay lifted on the backyard supply without spending a cent on electricity or nutrients. But I hope you're all doing well despite the state of the world. Just keep growing your own and have fun with it, whether you do it indoors, outdoors, bio, salt, doesn't matter to me. If you're having fun growing your weed and you like it, that's really all that matters. You don't have to impress anybody but yourself. And if you're enjoying it, you're doing it right. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be expensive. You don't have to do it all year round. Just as long as you're doing it, you're doing it. And that's the key. Because at the end of the day, if you love herb, that's enough. And I hope I've put a few ideas in your head that way. Anyways, have yourselves a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.